gap, and we can use a creative mind, a different type of conditionality, a progressive spiral conditionality. We can create the conditions for ever improving, developing, expanding states of consciousness that create the conditions for further expanding states of consciousness. That's a spiral conditionality. And last week, Satyajyoti explained how conditioned co-production can be split into 5 different categories, 5 different types, which we call 5 niyamas, 5 kind of natural laws. And the first 3 concern the laws of science, really, inorganic laws, gravity, organic laws like chemistry, biology, and the laws of social science, instinct, perception. The first 3 of these types of conditioned co-production. But where, on the religious life, the spiritual life, particularly concerned with the 4th and the 5th, the karma and the dharma niyama. So we heard last week particularly how the law of karma talks about the kind of conditions where our actions in the present condition our future states of mind, our personality in the future, and how that determines the kind of realm or the world that we inhabit. So every action is like planting a seed which will bear fruit in the future. And Vedanya gave a talk on conditionality a couple of weeks ago where he said, well, we can either be governed by the past, we can kind of keep living out the past again or again, or we can be a magician. And he said magicians live from the future backwards. A magician starts off with a vision of what he wants to create or she wants to create, and then will act now, choose to act now in a way that will bring that vision about in the future. So we can use the law of karma very creatively to take control of change and become the kind of person we want to become. So towards the end of her talk last week, Satyajyoti talked about the importance of external conditions. Karma maybe talks about our internal conditions, our states of mind, but Satyajyoti also talked about the importance of external conditions. And she used the metaphor of her rose bush, which she's planted and which she really cares about. She says she really cares about this rose bush, and she gives it the best conditions because she wants it to grow and to flourish and to bloom. And she said, well, we're the same as this rose bush. We depend on outer conditions, and we should take care of ourselves in the same way, so that we can blossom, we can grow, we can bloom, burst into flower. So there's a key question really in the spiritual life. What are the conditions that will lead to our growth, to our development, to our liberation? What are those conditions? What are the best conditions to put ourselves in? And unsurprisingly, the Buddha had something to say about this. So I want to go back to the source, the teachings of the Buddha, and a story of an encounter between the Buddha and one of his disciples, who was actually his attendant at the time, a man called Meghiya. So according to this sutra, this story, which is in a very ancient collection of teaching stories about the Buddha called the Udana. The Buddha was staying in a place called Kalika, on Kalika Hill, and he was being attended by Meghiya. The Buddha usually had an attendant, someone who looked after him, stayed with him, a friend, basically helped to be with him and care for him. And on this occasion it was a man, a disciple called Meghiya. And it said that Meghiya basically was maybe starting to get hungry, asked the Buddha, can I go and beg for food? Can I go on my begging round? And the Buddha said to Meghiya, yeah, do what you think it's time for, Meghiya. And so Meghiya goes off to the nearest village and collects some food, and he goes down to the banks of a river and sits down to tuck into whatever food he's been given in his begging bowl. And then he spots what he thinks is a delightful place, a lovely, beautiful mango grove where he can sit and eat his food. So he goes and sits and eats his food in this lovely mango grove. India is a really hot place at different times of the year especially, and apparently mango trees have really thick leaves, so it'd be a really shaded place, but full of juicy, ripe mangoes as well. So just a really beautiful, cool place to sit, a lovely place to sit. And the thought occurs to Meghiya, this would be a great place to meditate and try and become enlightened like the Buddha. If I could sit here, this would be the perfect place to become enlightened, perfect place to strive and make effort in meditation. So he goes, he thinks to himself, I'm going to go back to the Buddha and ask for his permission to come and meditate here. And he goes back, probably very excited, thoughts of all the states he's going to get into in meditation. And he says to the Buddha, Blessed One, Lord, I've found this lovely, delightful mango grove. It's a perfect place for a homeless wanderer like me, a young man who's gone forth from a good family into the homeless life to make effort in meditation. Please, will you give me permission to go and meditate in this beautiful place? And the Buddha, to Meghier's frustration, doesn't just say yes straight away. The Buddha says to Meghier, well, if you leave, I'll be on my own. Can you wait a while until somebody else comes? So Meghier's frustrated, but he's not put off by this, and he asks the Buddha a second time, but a bit more strongly this time. He says, well, Lord, this would be a beautiful place, a great place to go and meditate, and you've achieved everything there is to do. There's nothing more for you to do, but for me there's so much more to do, so much more to achieve. Please let me go and meditate. But the Buddha just says again to Meghier, Meghier, if you go now, I'll be on my own. Just wait a little until somebody else comes. And then Meghier asks a third time and says again, look, there's so much more for me to do. Please let me go and meditate. So traditionally, if someone asks 3 times the Buddha, it's a significant number. And the Buddha says to Meghier, what can I say? Maybe with a bit of irony, what can I say? Because Meghier's not really listening to the Buddha. When you talk about making effort and striving in meditation, what can I say? Do what you think it's the right time to do. Do what you think it's time to do. So Meghier is delighted, and he sets off. It says he prostrates to the Buddha. He sets off to meditate in this delightful manga grove with thoughts of the states of dhyana he'll get into, maybe of becoming a stream entrant, of becoming a Buddha, an arahant like the Buddha. But when he sits down to meditate, it doesn't go according to his plans. He's very surprised, actually. He sits down, and rather getting into these blissful states that he's anticipating and really looking forward to, his mind, he says, is assailed by lustful thoughts, by malicious thoughts, and thoughts that are cruel thoughts. And Meghier is really kind of disturbed, but also confused. He says, this is strange, why my mind is being assailed by these thoughts. What's going on? Someone like me who's gone forth from a good family into homeless life, why am I being assailed by these thoughts? So he's quite alarmed. He almost thinks the wood is haunted, that the place where he's staying is haunted. But it's his own mind, his own thoughts. And he goes back, maybe chastened, sobered, back to the Buddha, and explains what's happened, very confused, and saying to the Buddha, well, yeah, I tried to meditate, and my mind is overcome by these lustful thoughts, these cruel thoughts, these malicious thoughts. And it's interesting that the Buddha doesn't chastise Meghier, doesn't tell him off and say, oh, you stupid Meghier, didn't listen to what I told you. He gives Meghier, he realises now Meghier is listening, now he can give him a teaching. So the Buddha gives Meghier a list of 5 conditions that will lead to awakening. So maybe at this stage, before I reveal what the list is, just to explore a bit about Meghier's character, in a way, Meghier's temperament. What does the sutta tell us about the kind of person Meghier might be? Well, to begin with, we oughtn't to be too hard on him, because he's made a massive commitment to the spiritual life. He's left what sounds like a good family. He's living quite a difficult life, homeless, wandering life in the forest with the Buddha. And the sutta describes him as venerable Meghier. So he's got a decent. We can't be too hard on him, but at the same time, he does appear a little foolish, doesn't he? He appears a bit naive and a bit foolish, and very selfish actually when you explore it. And it sounds like Meghier doesn't really know himself that well. He thinks it's strange when he sits to meditate. He's really surprised by the contents of his own mind. It's like he doesn't really know his own mind. He doesn't know himself that well. It's a real surprise to him. And he's not a person that seems to have kind of loyalty or gratitude to the Buddha, or kind of sense of loyalty. It's his duty to be the Buddha's attendant, and the Buddha's asking him to stay with him. But Meghier is more interested in he's excited about his own attainment. He wants to become a big enlightened meditator like the Buddha. He's really kind of caught up with this image of himself, his own attainment. So he thinks he knows better than the Buddha. The Buddha's saying to him, well, actually, this might not be the best thing to do, but Meghier's insisting. He's not listening to the Buddha. And he's impatient. He can't wait maybe a few hours or a few days till somebody else comes. He has to go now. He has to go now and meditate in this beautiful place. He can't wait. He wants to in a sense, he wants to go straight to. He's got this vision of going straight to awakening, a bit of a shortcut, going straight to the end and getting there now. He wants to go now and meditate now. So Meghier's attitude is, you could say, individualistic and quite selfish. He's grasping after this kind of attainment, this idea of meditative attainment, spiritual attainment. And he's ignoring the well-being of his friend, who happens to be the Buddha as well, his teacher. The Buddha's asking him to stay and look after him. Meghalaya isn't interested, he just wants his own attainment. Yeah. So Meghalaya sees the spiritual life as being about meditative attainment, but he's not really seeing the importance of the people he's around with, a kind of more rounded path. So if you had the choice to sit and be with the Buddha or to go and meditate on your own, what would you choose to do? I would definitely choose to be with the Buddha if I could be. So what Meghalaya doesn't really appreciate is the effect of the conditions, the external conditions, and the association with the external conditions in his own mind, his own mental states. He hasn't really got that. So the Buddha gives him a really important list of teachings. These are, and he uses this really beautiful phrase for enlightenment as well, which I'll show you. So the Buddha says to Meghalaya, when somebody's heart or mind, when the release of their heart is immature, there are 5 conditions that lead to its maturing. This is quite a beautiful way of talking about enlightenment. The phrase that she uses, Chaito Vimutti. I've missed an I off the end, Chaito Vimutti. So Chaito means heart or mind, and Vimutti means release, freedom, liberation. So the Buddha describes awakening enlightenment as our heart being freed, our heart being released. So it creates an image of our heart maybe being trapped or jailed or imprisoned by things like greed or ignorance or hatred or craving. And enlightenment is the freedom, the liberation from those states, our heart just being completely freed to love and to have compassion and wisdom. So it's a very beautiful way of describing, poetic way of describing enlightenment, the heart's release. So what are the 5 conditions, the 5 external conditions? So the Buddha says to Meghalaya, the first, when your heart's, and in a sense he's talking to Meghalaya, but he's talking to anybody whose heart's release is immature, who's not enlightened. The first condition, he says, is having spiritual friends, associates and companions. This is the first condition that leads to the maturity of our heart's release. And he uses 2 words. He talks about spiritual friendship, kalyana mitrata, which some of us will be familiar with. And he also talks about spiritual intimacy, which again is a lovely kind of poetic way of talking about friendship, intimacy with spiritual friends. And I'll explore what he might mean by spiritual friends in a little while. The second condition the Buddha said will lead to the maturing of our heart's release is ethics. The Buddha says being virtuous, keeping the precepts, practicing ethical behaviour, seeing danger even in the smallest faults, and training in the 5 precepts. This is the second thing that will lead to the maturing of the heart's release. And then the Buddha tells Meghalaya the third condition is to be surrounded by and have easy access to talk that is uplifting, talk that opens the mind, talk that conduces to detachment, calm, dispassion, understanding, insight. That is to say, talk about having few wants, about contentment, about arousing energy, about ethical living, about meditation and wisdom, about liberation and insight. This is the third condition. And the Buddha tells Meghalaya the fourth condition is to live with energy that's aroused for abandoning unskillful states and cultivating skillful states. A vigorous, energetic persevering. And he talks about, to Meghalaya, not laying aside the burden of what is skillful. Which made me think of something Bodhinaga talked about a couple of weeks ago about the humps that we experience. When we're trying to break new ground, we have to kind of go over a hump of discomfort. We have to go through difficulty. There's a difficulty we have to bear with being skillful, being ethical. And then finally, the Buddha tells Meghalaya, having insight, penetrative insight that sees that all things rise and fall, and the insight that leads to the end of suffering. So the Buddha's telling Meghalaya, insight into conditioned co-production. If you have that wisdom and vision, penetrating insight into conditioned co-production, that is the fifth and final condition that leads to enlightenment, to your heart's release being mature. And then the Buddha says a further thing to Meghalaya, which is really, really important. The Buddha says to Meghiya, somebody who's got spiritual friendships and companions and spiritual friends can be expected to have, to be virtuous and keep the precepts, to practice ethical behaviour and train in the 5 precepts. And somebody who's got spiritual friends and companions can be expected to be surrounded and have easy access to Dharma talk, to talk that opens the mind and is uplifting. Talk about having few wants, talk about meditation, ethics, contentment. And somebody who has spiritual friends and companions can be expected to have their energy aroused to cultivate what's skillful and abandon what is unskillful. And a person who has spiritual friends and companions can be expected to have penetrative insight into the arising and passing of all things that leads to the end of suffering. So, but the Buddha tells Meghiya, if you've got this first condition of spiritual friends and companions, all the other conditions can be expected to come out of that first condition. So if you can have that first condition in place, all the others can be expected. So the Buddha's saying, in effect, spiritual friends are the key condition in the spiritual life. That's the kind of root condition for enlightenment. So it's a really, really important teaching. So this is an important list that I want to explore. And this is one way of answering Satyajyoti's question last week. What are the conditions that will lead to, if we're a rose bush, what will be the equivalent of the soil and the fertiliser and the sunlight and the water? What are the conditions that will lead to us blooming, us growing, blossoming, to our growth, to our enlightenment? What are those conditions? And the Buddha's teaching to Meghiya gives us one example of the potential list that we could really explore and make use of, actually, these conditions that lead to the heart's liberation. So the theme of the series is bringing it back home. We're looking at these ancient teachings and seeing how we can apply them to ourselves, our time, our culture. So is this relevant to us? So the first thing I want to explore, well, are we different to Meghiya? We've seen how Meghiya, in a sense, is a bit naive, a bit immature. He doesn't know his own mind. He's assailed by these thoughts in meditation. I suppose we can each answer for ourselves, and I can answer them for myself. It sounds like a description of me, actually. It sounds like Meghiya is very similar to me, and it's very reassuring that somebody committed to to being a disciple of the Buddha isn't so dissimilar to me, actually, and the Buddha gives him a teaching that he can really use. And what about our modern times? Because it's very different. The Buddha, people left home, they lived in the forest with the Buddha. It's a very simple life. Our lives are very complex. We live 2,500 years later in very different times. Can this list, is it really relevant to us? Does it apply to us? Well, I would say even more than at the time of the Buddha, we live in a time which emphasises individualism, people just trying to be their own person, and even more than at the time of the Buddha, you could say Sangha is crucial. Friends and Sangha are really important. To be part of a spiritual community is even more important right now, you could say. In a sense, we can be fooled into thinking we can do it on our own. We can get any book on Buddhism from the bookshop or from Amazon. We can have it delivered the next day, even the same day. We can access all kinds of things online, and we can be fooled into thinking we can do it on our own, really. We don't need other people. But experience tells us if you try it, it's actually very difficult to make progress and sustain progress on your own. That's what I've discovered. I rely, without other people, actually, I'm nothing, actually. Without the Sangha, my spiritual life won't amount to very much. So we have this emphasis on individualism, on consumerism, getting things right now, wanting to have things straight away, and there's an impatience in our society. We want things right now. And so in a sense we are even more like Meghiya, more so our society. So I think this is a really relevant teaching for our times. But maybe what we need to do is translate it, unpack it. Well, what might this look like? What might these 5 conditions look like for ourselves in our time, in our practice? How might we put these into practice? Yeah, so we don't live as renunciants in the forest, and we can't, like Meghiya, just be with the Buddha all the time, being affected by the Buddha. So what would it look like to bring this teaching back home into our times? And I'll be drawing quite a lot on a book, which is a talk that was given by Padmavajra on this sutta, called Going for Refuge and the Liberation of the Heart. Really recommend it. It's a talk that he gave to men training for ordination, but a lot of the things he says are relevant to us as well, if you're not in that situation. So I'll be drawing a bit on this leaflet. Yeah, so as we go through these conditions, I'll be asking two questions for you to reflect on, really, and of myself. Well, what would each one of these things look like for us in our life, in our situation? And how might it be that spiritual friendship might underpin the others in our lives? How might spiritual friendship underpin the others for us? So I'll take them in turn and just explore them a bit. So, yeah, the Buddha uses these two phrases, Kalyana Mitrata, which we often come across in Triratna, which means spiritual friendship. And he also uses Kalyana Sampavika, which means intimacy, an intimacy with what is people that are noble and auspicious. So what is a spiritual friendship, and why is that different to our normal friendships that we might have? What is it that characterises a spiritual friendship? So my response to this, it would be a friendship that's based on a particular goal of each other's growth and transformation and development. It's a friendship that's based on that and encourages that, and it's a friendship that is based on what is highest, what is most noble, and brings that out in each friend. If you've got a friendship like that, you're very lucky. A friendship which is based on what's highest and noble and brings that out in each other, and a friendship that encourages transformation and growth and development. So ideally, within a Sangha context, we're open to each other's growth and transformation. Not just open to it, we're actively encouraging it. We want people to grow, we want people to change and transform. But you might have experience of friendships or relationships which, in a sense, sometimes outside of a spiritual friendship context, people might feel threatened by change, threatened by your growth. There's an investment in you not changing and not growing. So I'm not saying, and I don't think the Buddha's saying, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a wide, broad range of friendships. I think it's really important that we have a broad range of friendships. But what the Buddha's saying is to, in a sense, pay attention to the effect different conditions have on you. And the condition of being around spiritual friends, that friendship that's based on what's noblest and highest and will bring that out on you. What effect will that have on you? What effect does it have on you? And in our Buddhist community, the Triratna Buddhist community, we've got a strong tradition of emphasising the crucial importance of Sangha, of spiritual community. And experience shows us we need a Sangha to practice effectively. The people we mix with have a really profound effect on us. So we need the support and encouragement of like-minded people. We need advice and inspiration from people who are a bit more experienced than us. And we need a social context where there's trust and honesty, warmth and openness, where we can be ourselves and be more vulnerable and grow and transform. So I want to explore how those spiritual friendships might look a bit more and how we can get a bit more of them. I want to go through and just explore these other conditions first. So the Buddha talks about the second condition which leads to enlightenment as being Shila, ethics. So he talks about acting ethically, training in the 5 precepts, paying attention to small faults. That will lead to awakening, to liberation. So, the question is why? Why would that lead to liberation? So hopefully this isn't new to you already. And we heard last week about the law of karma, Satyajoti talking about the law of karma. If we act ethically, the law of karma says our consciousness will grow, it will transform, we'll be liberated, we will dwell in different states. So there's a connection between ethical behaviour and our future state of mind, in a sense our liberation. So, and how does being around spiritual friends encourage this? How does it lead to more ethical behaviour? So I'm asking it, I suppose, kind of semi-rhetorically. I'll give an answer, but I want you to kind of be reflecting as well. How does spiritual friendship in your life, or the Sangha, being around the Sangha, even if you're quite new to the Sangha, do you find yourself being more ethical? In what ways does it encourage you to be more ethical? So I was thinking of an example of a spiritual friend of mine, Amogavanksa. He's not here tonight, he's unwell, but I often talk about him because he's one of my closest spiritual friends and my preceptor. But But yeah, early on I realised I could learn a lot more about the Dharma and about ethics by observing how he behaves than all of the books I could read and all the talks I could listen to. Just seeing it embodied in a person is a just much more powerful teaching. If you can see a friend who embodies kindness and embodies generosity and patience and compassion, it just gives you a living example of what that might look like for you. Suddenly it's not an abstract idea or concept, but you can see it being expressed and the effect it has on you. So a spiritual friend can exemplify what an ethical life looks like and give you an example, really, give you a role model. In a sense, help you to imagine what that might be like in your life. Also, if there's a sense of trust within Sangha or spiritual friends, where you might find yourself opening up to somebody in the Sangha, maybe an order member or somebody you've got a close friendship with, and just confessing things, just talking about your own ethical life, just feeling, well, here's a context where I can really talk about things that I can't talk about in other contexts, just things that I want to move away from, things that I don't feel I can talk about. But you can just be really, when you're surrounded by kindness and awareness, you can just really go into and explore the effects of your actions and the consequences of your actions and be inspired to move away from them, to let go of them. So you might find yourself in situations of confession with spiritual friends and in the Sangha where you just feel compelled to open up and trust that you can open up to people. And also, your friends will ideally draw out what's best in you, draw out the positive precepts from you. One way they do this is through rejoicing. Friends will spot things that you positive qualities that maybe you can't see, and name them, rejoice in them, and it helps to draw them out. So friends will encourage and support your positive growth, to become more positively ethical, to be kinder, more generous, more content, more truthful. There's something about a sense of conscience as well around friends, people that we respect and look up to. It becomes a bit more difficult to be unethical around them. It's almost like we don't want to go against that shared value that you have, in a spiritual friendship. The friendship is based on what's most noble, and it becomes very difficult to go against that, to break the precepts in that kind of situation. So you might have some own examples for yourself of how spiritual friends help you to be more ethical and what that looks like for you. But the Buddha is emphasising to Meghalaya and to us the importance of ethics, really committing to the 5 precepts, practising those in different parts of your life, and that will lead to awakening, that will lead to enlightenment. And thirdly, the Buddha talks about what Pamavajra calls Dhamma Kata, Dharma talk. The Buddha describes it as talk that's uplifting and opens the mind. It conduces to attachment, calm, dispassion, understanding, insight. That is, talk about few wants, talk about contentment, about arousing energy, about ethical living, about meditation, about wisdom, about liberation and insight. So, our speech is really, really important. So the speech we're around and the speech we choose to talk about, it kind of creates an environment, it creates an atmosphere, it creates a world that we live in. So we can be, this conditioned co-production explains that we're conditioned by the situations we find ourselves in. If I think back to different situations, different friendships, different contexts, and people talk in different ways in those contexts. And I was thinking earlier about my university friends who occasionally I meet up with, and we have a WhatsApp group where we kind of send messages and updates to each other. But the quality of the conversation, the talk, it doesn't conduce to opening the mind and being uplifted and being more ethical. It kind of it's largely about teasing each other or pointing out each other's kind of faults, reminding each other about foolish things that you did. It's kind of conduces to being a bit less ethical, to breaking the precepts. And as I say, it's not, I really love those friends and those friendships and get a lot from them, but it's just important to notice the effects that different contexts have on you and the choice you have about how often you place and when you place yourself in different conditions and the effect it has on you. So in a sense, the Buddha is talking about living with monks who are just talking about the Dharma all the time. They'll be around the Buddha, they'll be talking about the ideas of the Buddha, the Dharma, all of the time. So in a sense, you're in an environment where you're immersed in the Dharma. You're kind of soaked in the Dharma, just imbibing the Dharma, just being in that environment. So what might that translate into for us? Well, in a sense, it might translate into studying the Dharma in different situations, really immersing yourself in the concepts of the Dharma, and then being prepared when you're in a situation when you're talking about them. You know the Dharma, and you're prepared to be able to engage in that talk about the Dharma. So it's Sangha night. Well, you might consider taking notes about the talk. Really think, okay, I want to immerse myself in this talk and these ideas. Take notes about it so I can go back and refer to it later. And then when it's time for the Sangha night discussion group, you can be really engaged, really immerse yourself in that discussion. Ask questions, be really alive, engage, say things that feel really important in those discussion groups. And at the same time, if you talk a lot, leave space for other people to talk in those discussion groups as well. Listen to the other people's Dharma talk as well. Yeah, and if you're part of a Mitra group, really prepare well for your Mitra study group. Immerse yourself in the Dharma so you can really engage in Dharma talk in that discussion group. And it does, this talk in this way, the effect it has on me is uplifting and opening my mind, inspiring. It makes me want to be more ethical and want to live a Dharma life. I can often is untrue, but sometimes I'll turn up to a discussion group not feeling that inspired and not feeling like I want to be ethical and a Buddhist and the rest of it, but just talking about with other people about the Dharma brings it alive in me, and within each other we bring the Dharma alive, we inspire each other, and I always leave feeling uplifted, open-minded, wanting to lead that life and commit to it. So it's really important to immerse yourself in Dharma talk and talk about the Dharma. And fourthly, the Buddha says to be energetic with the pursuit of cultivating skillful states and abandoning negative states. He talks about perseverance in not laying down, not putting down the burden of skillfulness, which I thought was a really interesting phrase to use to Megha. Sometimes it can be tempting to think, it's too difficult, I'm not going to try to be skillful, but actually our friends will give us the energy, the inspiration, the motivation not to give up, but to break through those habits. In particular, Pabhavajra talks about meditation as being a place of work. He talks about kammatthana, meditation is a place of work. So in meditation, you're really committed to and focused on abandoning unskillful states and cultivating skillful states. It's not really just a place to relax. Meditation might start with relaxing if you need to relax, but actually the purpose of meditation is to transform your mind, to work with your mind, and it very much in line with the law of karma. And it's interesting, at the end of giving this list of 5 things to Megha, the Buddha advises Megha to do the metta bhavana. He says, if you've got thoughts that are malicious and harmful and cruel, you need to cultivate loving kindness, you need to do the metta bhavana to counter that. And if you're getting overrun with discursive thinking in meditation, you need to do the mindfulness of breathing, the Buddha told Megha, which are the 2 practices that 2,500 years later we're teaching to you guys and we're practicing. So meditation is a place that we need to really try and cultivate a daily practice of meditation, proper meditation where we're cultivating new habits, we're abandoning what's unskillful and cultivating what's skillful. And to do that, you need to try and get a daily meditation practice, but also put yourself in conditions where meditation will flower and blossom. Go on retreats and meditate with other people. So this is where Sangha and spiritual friendship really comes in with meditation, because you can meditate with other people, and I just find that so much easier. The idea to get up and meditate at the moment 6 o'clock before my children get up. It's quite hard to do that. I'm committed to doing it because of the effect it has on me. But if I'm at a retreat centre, everyone's getting up at 6:30, it's just easy, I just do it because everybody else is doing it and I can just go along with that. So being around other people who are doing the same thing makes it so much easier. And I don't know if you find this as well, but if you're meditating, say you're doing the metta bhavana, which we'll be doing later, an atmosphere sometimes gets generated collectively. It's almost like we're doing a metta bhavana collectively. There's a collective metta that gets cultivated. It just becomes a lot easier to kind of open up into that rather than trying to cultivate metta on my own in my own kind of shrine room or living room. So maybe also an encouragement to notice what it's like to go on retreat and meditate with people. And maybe if you can, stay for the meditation after the class so we can have a big number of us pumping out the metta bhavana later, just cultivating metta collectively. Yeah, so meditation's key, but there's also, just turn the page in one place. Yeah, this phrase about having the perseverance not to put down the burden when it feels tough. So yeah, I often get inspired by other people living the Dharma life. You know, there's times when it feels hard and there can be the temptation to give up, but then you see other people striving, making effort, facing difficulty, making breakthroughs, becoming really impressive people, and that's inspiring. That's really inspiring for me. It's like, yeah, I want to do that. I can do that. So yeah, just friendships can be really inspiring when you see people making progress and committed to making progress. So yeah, I get encouraged, I get inspired, energy gets aroused from being around spiritual friends. Just also ritually, when we're doing ritual and we chant the refuges and precepts together, I'm reminded of my commitment and other people's commitment. That inspires me as well. I think, yeah, other people are doing this as well, I want to do this. Making an offering to the shrine with other people, it feels like a collective effort. So yeah, other people, the Sangha is really important for me with feeling energised, feeling inspired, motivated. And finally, the Buddha talks about wisdom. Wisdom is the fifth condition that leads to the maturing of the heart's release to enlightenment. So Padmavajra in his talk says, well, this means really reflecting deeply on the teachings of the Buddha. It's not just enough to hear them and immerse yourself in them, but we need to turn them over in our mind. We need to reflect deeply on them so that they become eventually how we see. We penetrate into a different way of seeing the world by reflecting deeply on these teachings, reflect systematically on them. And he talks about particular retreats in ordination training where we go into some of the wisdom teachings. On my ordination retreat, I took on particular insight meditation practices that really go into and look into these wisdom teachings and help to kind of, in a sense, when you're ready for them, to really imbibe them, really make them, really reflect on them deeply. So I think what I was reflecting, in a sense, this fifth one, Satyajyoti last week talked about action and fruit. There's a kind of an effort, and then there's an outcome. She talked about this term vipaka in relation to karma. You do something, and then there's a fruit. You make some effort, and then you can wait for the fruit to open. And it's a bit like that in meditation. In the metta bhavana, you bring something to mind, you cultivate metta, and then you sit and you wait, and you see what happens. There's a kind of waiting where the fruit arises from that practice. And for me, wisdom is the fruit of all these other conditions. It's like you put all these other conditions in place, and you reflect deeply on the Dharma, and wisdom eventually will arise. Wisdom will arise as a fruit of these conditions, these other efforts. Yeah, maybe that's enough to say at this stage about it. So, now I want to just explore, well, if spiritual friends are the root condition, if having spiritual companions, spiritual friends, Sangha in your life is the condition for all these other things that lead to enlightenment, how can we get more of them in our life? What would that look like? Yeah, how can we do that? So Meggie had the opportunity to be with the Buddha all of the time. And we might spend one night a week, a couple hours a week coming to the Buddhist Centre. Is that enough? How can we get more of that in our lives? And how can we be creative with our lives so we can immerse ourselves more with these conditions? And hopefully, as you'll see, we need to be creative with that, about finding ways to spend time with spiritual friends. So firstly, I just wanted to explore a bit more about the nature of spiritual friendship, because our teacher, our founder, Sangharakshita, identifies, well, there's different dimensions of spiritual friend. There are spiritual friends which are, you could see almost like there's a kind of vertical axis of friendship. There are people who are more experienced and know more about Buddhism than we do, and have more attainment than we do. And there are people who need our help, people who are less established, less experienced with the Dharma. So there's this kind of axis of friendship, a vertical axis. There's also people on the same, more or less the same kind of stage we're at. It's kind of more kind of what you might call a horizontal dimension of spiritual friendship. And Sangha nights and Sangha retreats, you're going to get access to all kinds of levels of experience. So in a sense, coming to Sangha night, going to Sangha retreats, you're going to encounter people of all levels of different experience really, so you're naturally going to get these different dimensions in your life. So by being here, you're in a sense, I'm preaching to the converted, you guys are doing the right thing already, part of it. One of the things I really like about our pathway into Sangha night and into our community, in a sense, what we put on loads of classes and courses, but what we're really about, and we stress this right the way through the intro courses, we're about building a community. We're about this first condition really, because all of us, even the people who work here and teach, we rely on a spiritual community. We rely on finding like-minded people. So the more people engage with our Sangha, the bigger our Sangha grows, the deeper it grows, the more everyone benefits. What I really like about our intro courses is the fact that you get to meet like-minded people and you get to kind of make friends, and it's a sense of being on a journey with people at a similar stage. So you meet people on the 12-week courses, you come to Sangha night, you're in the same group, you might go on retreats together, Sangha retreats, but you start to kind of form friendships with people at a similar, this kind of horizontal aspect of friendship, people at a similar stage on the path. And then maybe you could think about meeting up outside of the centre if you don't do this already. How can you bring those friends more into your life? How can you stay in contact outside of the Sangha? You could do things together, meet up together, go on retreats together, go on Sangha retreats together. It might be just you've been in a discussion group with someone on a Sangha retreat and suddenly, or even a conversation over a meal, but you find a new friendship emerging and blossoming. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about my friendship with Maitridasa in this regard, that we've shared a journey very much in this way. We got involved at the centre at a similar time, within quite a short amount of time together. We found ourselves in a mitra group together, studying the Dharma together. We found ourselves opening up about ethics with each other, just kind of telling each other everything about our lives. Maitridasa initiated that, but we did that quite early on. We just met up and told each other our life stories and shared things that we hadn't shared with other people. And it's been a friendship out of which has come inspiration, energy to practice. And we've seen each other, witness each other grow and transform, become wiser, become different people. We trained for ordination together. We were ordained together on a 16-week ordination course. We shared a hut together for 16 weeks, so we got to know each other really, really intimately. There was this intimacy of spiritual friendship that the Buddha talks about. It even got to a stage where again this was Maitridasa's initiative, but rather than seeing the hut split into two halves, where this was my side and that was Maitridasa's side, we tried to have more of a sense of just a shared space. So we had shared books on one shelf, we had a shared shrine with pictures of our loved ones together. We even had shared cosmetics, and even went as far as having shared laundry. We just put our dirty pants in the same laundry bag, and whenever it got full, one of us would go and wash them. And it became a joy actually just to kind of share that kind of intimacy with each other in that way over 16 weeks. I even found myself wanting to get up before the meditation and make a cup of tea for Maitridasa, which is unheard of. So it was a real experience, that 16 weeks. And then after that we found ourselves, we've worked together for the last 7 years, trying to create these conditions, share these conditions with other people, and that's been a real journey as well. So it's been a real privilege, this friendship with Maitridasa. So I wanted to talk about living together. I live with my wife and 2 children, so this period of living intimately with other men training for ordination was one of the happiest times of my life actually, just living with people who are just like-minded, focused on the same thing, living in community. So it's something I would ask you to consider really. If you're in a position where you live on your own or just rent a house, shared house, why not consider living with other Buddhists, trying to create a context where you're immersed with like-minded people who want you to grow and develop. If some people in the audience might have the freedom to consider doing that, the opportunity to. If you are, I'd encourage you to consider that. In the early days of True Ratna, soon after the kind of early True Ratna movement, people were going on retreat together. People decided they'd quite like to live together, so people started to form Buddhist communities. And in Sheffield we've got 4 Buddhist communities. We've got a men's community that live just through that door, and we've got another men's community at the top of the drive, and a women's community in Walkley. And then, as I said earlier, you can be creative about living situations. So there's a married couple, Gavin and Trish, in Norfolk Park, and they've turned their family home into a community, and they've got 3 Sangha members now. The children have moved out, and they've got 3 Sangha members who live with them, which is a really radical way of living, actually. They've opened their home up and made it into a community. So we can.
Don and Dan as well.
And Don and Dan live together in a community, yes. So we've got 5. 5. So there might even be more that I don't know about, and I hope that soon there will be more of these contexts where people live together, share their lives together in this way. And then another thing Buddhists, particularly in Triratna, have tried to do, in a sense we can't be renunciants and live in a forest, but what we need to do is earn a living and live somewhere. So why not do that with people who've got the same values as you? If you can, why not work with other Buddhists? So again, there's been a tradition in Triratna of forming projects and businesses and Buddhists working together. And this is something I've had the freedom to be able to do myself, and I've really benefited from those conditions. So while I was training to be ordained, I worked in a Buddhist business in Orchard Square. We had a gift shop called Evolution, and I worked there with Maitridasa, with Mokshitara, with lots of other people, Dayavajra. And it was really great to be in that context of working alongside my friends. So we'd see each other at Sangha night, but during the day we'd be committed to try and work in an ethical way, encourage each other to work in a way that brought the best out of each other. After that, me and Dharma Mai, a friend of mine, set up another business it's called Still Learning, where we take Buddhism into schools, and the schools come here and learn about Buddhism. And again, by working together with Dharma Mai, it was a really beneficial context to be working with one of my friends in that way. And now working in the centre team with 5 of my friends, including Dharma Mai, Mokshitara, Maitridasa, it's a real. Well, what we've had is a deepening of those friendships over the years. Now we're working together in this context. So there may be people in the audience who might be able to work with other Buddhists. One of the situations, we haven't got Evolution sadly anymore, it went bust, so we haven't got a Buddhist gift shop. What we have got is a Buddhist cafe in Crooks, Dana Cafe, that was opened a year ago. And they're looking for people to volunteer and work there. So if you want to spend time working with other Buddhists, you'll find some of these conditions come out of that. And they're looking for people to volunteer and help them wash up and do other things, serve in that cafe. Particularly over the next few weeks where there's a lot of people away on holiday. So if you think, actually, I'd like to try that, I'd like to volunteer in that cafe, work with other Buddhists, see what that's like. Speak to Maitridasa or me, I suppose. Who else? Maitridasa, speak to Maitridasa down there, and in the tea break, and I'd really encourage you to do that, give that a try. And it could be just for a couple of hours in the cafe. They'd really benefit from that, and I imagine that you would really benefit from that too. So there's this vertical dimension to friendship. I talked about working with people at a similar level to you and sharing a Dharma life and that deepening in different contexts. But there's also, it's really important to be around people who know more about the Dharma, who've got more experience in the Dharma than you have, who can give you an example of what that looks like. So I talked earlier about Amoghavanksa just being an exemplar for me, just embodying what it might look like to be more ethical and just learning so much from seeing that example. So if you can put yourself in conditions where you're spending time with people who are more experienced in the Dharma than you, that's a really important thing to try and cultivate in your life. One of the things I talk and Pamavajra encourages is, be patient really, because order members might seem that their diaries are quite full. Often we have quite full diaries. We kind of live very engaged lives, some of us. But Pamavajra said, well, if an order member can't meet with you because he's preparing for a class or she's preparing for a class, well, help them. What you could do is help them do that. You could support them in delivering the Dharma, go along and help them to do something. You could probably learn a lot more about each other, from each other, by than sitting down and having a cup of tea, by doing something together. So Pamavajra says, well, be creative. Think about serving, helping, assisting the people you want to spend time with, rather than waiting for them not to be busy so they can spend time with you. And I had an example of this. I came across an order member called Achara when I was training for ordination, and quite soon I was a mitra. And I remember speaking to Amoghavanksa, who said, well, it's quite difficult to spend time with Achara because he's a director of companies, he's a family man. and he's got, but I was struck by he had a really potent practice. I thought, well, I'm probably going to think about having a family. I'm probably going to have a family. At the time, I was running my own business. I was really committed to having a strong Dharma practice. So I thought, well, I need to spend time with this guy. I need to find out how he does it. How does he do this? So I thought, well, and Mogabangsa said what he tried to do is travel down with Achara to some of his business meetings. So he'd spend like 2 or 3 hours in the car chatting to Achara while he was driving to business meetings. But what I thought, basically, I just went to Achara at an event for Mitras and asked him if he had any jobs. So I said, well, can I work for you? Have you got any jobs? And he said, well, actually, I'm looking for a secretary. And I ended up being his secretary for 4 years. And it's quite radical. I had my own company at the time, but I just thought I want to prioritise spending time with this man and learning how he lives the Dharma life and imbibing some of that. And it was a really great decision to done that and had the opportunity to spend that time with him. So think creatively. So there's that vertical element of just spending time with people who know more about the Dharma than you. But also, it doesn't stop there. Friendship involves helping people who are less experienced than you are. So you might find that being involved with supporting intro courses is a really beneficial thing to do. If you support a beginner's course, you meet people who are encountering the Dharma for the first time, and you can see the effect it has on them, how uplifting it is, and it gives you energy, it gives you inspiration. It makes you want to be more ethical. You're immersing yourself in that Dharma context, but helping people, supporting people who are less experienced than you. So you might consider supporting those intro courses. Really powerful thing to do. Yeah, and I remember lots of people whose courses I've taught, and it's a great privilege to see all of you come through those courses if I've been involved in them, seeing you grow, engage in the Dharma life, and become radically different people. I was just thinking of 2 other, there's lots of you I could talk about, but I was thinking of 2 young men who came along to intro courses just after me and Maitridasa got back. And just the transformation of Maitridasa and Ayodhasa, who in the last 6 or 7 years have put themselves in those conditions of living and working with other Buddhists, radically changing and then joining the order. Now I'm working with them, they're working in the centre team as well, and I'm working alongside them. So you get to help people and see them grow, and it's really inspiring. But then, then it's not so vertical. You end up finding people kind of, you become your peers then suddenly. And it's a real privilege to watch people come through in this way and progress in this way. Just one thing to say about this kind of natural hierarchy in the Sangha, in the spiritual life. It's not a kind of a conceited thing where you think, oh yeah, I'm better than that person, or I'm further along than that person, or they know more than me. It's more of a natural response of metta. If you cultivate metta and you're in a situation with somebody who's got more experience than you just naturally want to learn from them and support them and help them. It's such a natural response, really. It's not a kind of conceited response. And likewise, if you find yourself cultivating metta and being someone who would benefit from the Dharma, you just naturally want to help them engage with the Dharma. It's not, there's nothing kind of controversial or kind of conceited about it. It's just a natural response of loving kindness when you find yourself in relation to people with different levels of experience. So in those situations, we talked about the law of karma, and we can talk about having different strands within us. And what is important to pay attention to is in different situations, what's best in us becomes stronger, where the best in us becomes drawn out and strengthened, and put yourself in those contexts, in those situations as much as possible. And what the Buddha is saying is, well, the Sangha, the spiritual community, the spiritual friends, is a really good context for these conditions of the spiritual life to unfold and grow out of. Just to note, if you're new to Buddhism and new to the Sangha, well, in a sense, the same question arises for you as well. What situations bring out the best in you? Start to bring awareness into your life. Okay, what situations that I'm in all the different parts of my life? Which situations lead me to be more ethical, to be immersed in the truth and reality, to have more energy to live a good life, a noble life, and to be wiser? What conditions have a kind of a negative or positive effect on you? When are you at your most inspired or most motivated to live a noble life? It's really important to pay attention to that and act on it, really. Put yourself in the conditions that bring out the best in you. Yeah, so just to summarise, the crucial importance of the Sangha has always been recognised in Buddhism right back to the time of the Buddha, and is this teaching to Meghalaya. I mean, at one time the Buddha said to another of his attendants, Ananda, the spiritual friendship is the whole of the spiritual life. And I suppose you can see from this teaching why that might be so. If you can cultivate spiritual friends, that is the whole of the spiritual life comes out of that. So Sangha could be seen as a means to an end. It's a means to our own liberation. But it's also an end in itself. For many people, one of the most attractive things about Buddhism is spiritual community, the end of creating a spiritual community for other people to benefit in, to serve that, can be an end in itself. Yeah, and so Sangha is key, spiritual friendship is key, it's crucial, and by coming to Sangha night, you're helping to create a Sangha that other people can benefit in, that I can benefit in, that we can all benefit in. And the ideal of helping to build a community of people who are like-minded, that's on the basis of metta, of kindness, of generosity and openness, that can be one of the most inspiring things of the spiritual life.